G'day, and welcome to the Seacreatures Podcast, a show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode, we chat about a specific sea creature with a guest who has spent time and interacted with this specific animal. Our guests range from marine biologists to underwater photographers, citizen scientists, scuba divers, and anyone with an intense passion for marine life. My name's Matt Testoni, and I'm all of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Seacreatures Podcast is Gretta Pecl. And Greta is a marine biologist and one of the founders of REDMAP. And today we're going to be talking all about squid. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks.
So, start us off with how you got so knowledgeable and into squid.
Ooh, well, I wasn't always interested in squid. I actually wanted to do my honours project on shovel-nose rays. I wanted to look at the neural development in shovel-nose rays, and I went along to our head of school at James Cook Uni where I was and said, I want to work on shovel-nose rays. And he was like, if I had $1 for every student that came in here and said they want to work on sharks and rays, I'd be a very rich man. He said, go work on corals. And I was like, no, I want to work on something that's got eyes and moves around and behaviours and does stuff. And he went, go see Natalie and work on squid. And that's how it all started.
Cool. So where did you go from there? So what was your project? Tell us a little bit about how it started.
I worked on one of the smallest squid species in the world called Idiosepius, which is actually a sepiolid, so a pretty close relative of a squid. And they've got this little sucker gland on their back, and they adhere to the underside of mangroves and leaves and seagrass and things like that. And I'd go on a little kayak with a kitchen sieve on the end of a broom handle and scoop them up out of the water. And I was looking at their muscle development, because squids grow really strangely, or they don't stop growing, they just grow flat out and then one day they die. And that's pretty unusual in the animal world. Usually creatures are pretty constrained in how they grow, and they'll slow down and reach a final size, and it just doesn't happen in squid. They just grow flat out and then bang, they're dead. So it was interesting looking at how they grow.
How big was this squid that you were researching?
About the size of your small fingernail.
Wow.
Yeah, really tiny.
Did you find multiple at a time, or was it just you'd
find little groups of them. I'd go out of a morning in my little squid kayak, and sometimes you'd find 3, sometimes you'd find 30. But yeah, it was a great animal to study, because they only lived for 30 days. So they were super quick to study in an aquarium. They were a great experimental little animal to work on, and just super interesting. All squids are interesting with their weird behaviours, and all their life history is just kooky. So they're cool.
Wow, that's awesome. 30 days.
Oh, it's 3 months. I'm just remembering it's 3 months. It's not 30
3 months.
days.
3 months, all right.
Yeah.
A lot of people know kind of what a squid is,
yeah.
or they have a general idea of what a squid is, but describe what makes a squid, and I'm personally particularly interested in what's the difference between a squid, a cuttlefish, and an octopus?
Yeah, so they're all cephalopods, and they've all got that central muscle sac or mantle, and then they've all got a muscular head with the arms that comes off the head. But it's the overall body plan and physiology of squids that just make them so incredibly bizarre. And I mean, if you think about it, if you look at a squid's head, and they've got the beak in the center of all of those arms. If you think about it, when they're eating, their food actually has to go through a tube in their brain. Well, their feeding tube goes through their brain before it reaches their gut. It's like if we had our mouth on the top of our head. So that's one, incredibly kooky thing about them that they all have in common. So their food literally goes through their brain, and that's why they have that beak like a parrot. It literally looks like a parrot's beak, and they need that to smush their food up as small as possible, because it's got to go through the tube in their brain to reach their gut. And so they're pretty hard to understand sometimes exactly what they're eating in the ecosystem, because they just smush the hell out of everything that they eat. And then, the way that they move is pretty unusual with the jet propulsion or with the swimming. And so with all of them, with the squid, the cuttlefish and the octopus, they suck in water through their mantle, and then they can seal that off. So they seal their mantle up against the neck of their head, and then shoot their water out at high speed through the funnel, and that makes them shoot, in the opposite direction. And I guess the main difference between the squid, the cuttlefish and the octopus is the way that they move and a little bit of a variation on their body plan. You know, your octopus are more, they do a bit more creeping around on the bottom, and they're more into, you know, hiding in little nooks and crannies and sometimes living in the one spot and making their little gardens of shells and things like that. And then your cuttlefish are more, I think of those ones as the maneuverable ones. You know, they like living in complex environments, you know, in the tropics with coral that they're going in and under and around, or in and around kelp sort of systems down here in the south. And then your squid can be, you know, your high speed swimmers. They're your athletes of the cephalopod family, and they're the ones that typically can, you know, swim really fast and for long distances. But you do get inshore squid like the southern calamari with the big fins all around their body, and they're kind of like almost like a hybrid between a cuttlefish and a squid, because they can live in those environments where they are moving around and being, you know, really precise about their movements, or they can swim like an athlete as well.
Cool. And I have to ask this question because it always confuses me, but do squid have tentacles or arms?
Oh, they have 8 arms and 2 tentacles. So, yeah, squid have got the arms are the ones with the suckers all the way the length of the arm, and then the tentacles are just like muscular tubes with the end part that's got the suckers on them. And they'll contract those tentacles up tight against their body, and then when they see something that looks a bit tasty, they'll shoot those out at high speed and use the sucker bits on the end to grab something and pull it in towards the mouth. And then they use all the other arms to help manipulate that.
Cool. That was going to be my next question. What are the other arms for?
Yeah, their suckers in general are just bizarre. So each sucker has got independent nerve control to it, and they smell through the suckers. So when you're playing with an octopus under the water or whatever, and they're touching you all over, they're literally smelling with all those suckers.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of tell as well. I've had them like touch my camera before, and then they jump back with this like disgusted taste.
Yeah, probably some sort of silicone or chemical or something on the outside of the camera.
And so you mentioned tiny squid, and then I think a lot of people have heard of like colossal and giant squid, but are there different types of squid, or how does it all work?
I think there's roughly around 500 species of squid and cuttlefish and octopus in the world. So there's, you know, quite a number of different critters. They're in every ocean or marine environment in the world, from the shallows through to the great depths. None in freshwater at all. You get a couple in brackish water, you know, in that sort of half salty, half fresh water stuff. Yeah, so there's quite a few different ones, and they go from really small octopus or cephalopods, basically squid, that are about the size of your small fingernail. We've got a species down here too, actually, called Idiocepius notoides. So one of those little tiny ones the size of your fingernail that lives down here along the south coast of Tasmania, and then, you know, through right up to the giant squid and the colossal squid.
So have to ask, how big is a giant or a colossal squid?
Ooh, well, I'd have to look that up actually, but you can get them sort of 200, 300, 400 kilos. And there's always these debates, which is bigger, the giant squid or the colossal squid. And the colossal squid's a bit more chonky, but the giant squid's a bit longer.
And where do these giant ones live?
Deep. Very, very deep in the ocean, yeah. You get giant squid very occasionally on the surface, caught in a trawler or something like that, but they are the ones that are going through what we call senescence or dying. So they only ever come to the surface when they are dying. Yeah, you don't need to worry about them when you're taking your kids out to the beach or anything.
And so the tiny little ones, I'm imagining they eat like little shrimp and they catch little things and they chop it up with their beak.
Yes.
What do the giant ones do? And do they have a humongous beak?
Yes, they do have a pretty large beak. I'm trying to think exactly how I have dissected one giant squid with the Tasmania Museum quite a few years ago, and I think it's about the size of a football, something like that. Yeah, pretty sort of big.
What are they eating?
Oh, yeah, they'll eat anything that moves pretty much. They'll eat each other. So most squids are cannibals if they have to be. They don't have any problem turning around and eating their neighbour if they're feeling a bit peckish and there's nothing else around. But basically they'll eat anything that moves. They'll eat a lot of fish. They'll eat other species of squid and octopus. Yeah. They eat protein. They'll only eat live things. They don't like dead food, which is a bit of a challenge for us sometimes if we ever want to try and study some aspect of their life cycle in tanks. It's very labour intensive because you've got to go out beach seining and getting lots of little fish to feed them. And some squids eat up to 30% of their body weight in food a day. So they are ferocious hunters and very hungry critters.
And is that because they're growing so fast, so quickly?
Yes, so they grow exponentially. So rather than just sort of growing at, 10 grams a day, 10 grams the next day, 10 grams the day after or whatever, they'll grow at 10% a day. So it's a bit like your interest in a bank account. The more money you've got in there, the bigger your interest payout. And that's exactly how a squid grows. So, they might start off growing 10 grams a day, and then when they're a kilo, they'll grow 100 grams a day.
Yeah, and so they're growing this fast because they don't live very long, do they? They're quite short-lived?
Yes, they live, generally speaking, 1 to 2 years for most kind of species. And part of the reason they are capable of growing so fast is they are not spending anything on maintenance. So our bodies, for example, we will build up protein and then after a time we'll break some of that down to recreate our bodies over time so that, you pick up all those physiological cellular kind of problems and you fix them basically. A bit of maintenance, but squids don't do that. If things are broke, they just don't fix them. They just keep growing. They don't do cellular repair. They basically just grow. So all their investment is in growth and not in repair and maintenance. And that's why they reach a point where they basically just start dying and falling apart pretty much because they haven't fixed things along the way. But that means they save a lot of energy and they put all of that into growth.
And so they're growing huge. They get to this huge size just before they die. Is it correct all squid do like a mass spawning aggregation?
No. Oh, you're hitting on my PhD work now. There are some very prominent species that do the mass spawning. They'll grow like all hell and then they'll have a big mass spawning at the end, release all their eggs and then they will pass away. They'll go through that senescence dying process after they lay the eggs. But not all squids do that. And so the species that I did my PhD on, for example, was northern calamari up around Townsville and Brisbane and then southern calamari in New South Wales and in Tassie. So two super closely related species. And both of those will grow flat out for, 3 months, 6 months. And then they will spawn multiple times, but over a 2 or 3 month time period. So the one down here in Tassie, for example, will lay a batch of eggs every day or every second day over a time period of at least a month and up to 2, maybe even 3 months. Yeah, so they'll have eggs within the 1 year, but multiple batches of eggs.
Cool. And how long does an egg take to hatch? It must be different between squid, but what's the kind of gestation?
Yeah, so if we look at southern calamari down here in Tassie, so that's that, pretty sizable squid, you can get those up to 2 or 3, even 4 kilos. But, most of them are sort of less than a kilo. Pretty decent sized animal though. The eggs that they lay on those inshore seagrass beds, they will take between 4 to 8 weeks to hatch, and it depends on the temperature. So if it's a hot temperature, they will grow quicker and develop quicker, and they'll hatch out a little bit smaller. And if it's colder, they will develop slower, but they'll hatch out bigger in the end.
And so I have to ask, is climate change going to affect how squid reproduce and their size? And what are we kind of thinking is on the cards for squid and climate change?
Yes. So although I started off as a squid biologist, climate change is 99% of my work now. And you've just hit on how I transitioned from squid biology to climate change. I was doing lots of diving and fishing, looking at southern calamari on the east coast of Tassie, started to see lots of new species turn up, but also started to wonder how this species I was so fascinated by was going to change with climate, because every single thing I looked at in squid, whether it was growth or reproduction or where and when they were spawning, no matter what it was, the answer was, isn't that variable. Like, I feel like you could sum up about 20 years of squid work simply by saying, oh, yeah, they could pretty much do what they like. And yeah, just really plastic animals. And sort of by plastic, we mean, depending on the temperature, depending on the food they can get, they can grow really slow and end up enormous, or grow really quick but live for such a short time that they're small when they die. So, I really started to wonder, how are they going to go with climate change? And so, we're expecting that as waters warm up, they will develop more quickly in the egg stage. They will hatch out smaller. Their life cycles will be faster, but they'll be smaller on average. And we don't, given that most of them are annual, you're kind of like, oh, what happens if you speed up the life cycle of an annual animal in a seasonal environment, where you've got distinct hot and cold seasons like you do here in Tassie? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it'll be a bit of a mystery how things play out in the long run. And of course, because they can change their diet too, they don't care what they eat so long as it's a protein source and it's moving around and it doesn't have a big hard shell around the outside of it. So they'll eat just whatever is there. It doesn't matter if one species leaves or another one comes in, or what other changes are happening in that ecosystem. You can be almost guaranteed there'll be something there that squid will like to eat. And if not, they'll just eat their neighbours. So I'm reasonably confident that most squid species will be okay with climate change. But yeah, the populations themselves might, they could suddenly increase, or they might suddenly decrease, or they could shift where they are. But they're just so plastic that they'll probably be okay.
And I guess if they might be fine, but what they're eating, or if they change what they're preying on, that's where we might see big changes in the food web. Not losing squid, but losing other species.
Yes, that's exactly right. So you've got a whole bunch of animals out there that are eating 30% of their body weight a day, and they're quite happy to eat whatever comes along. So they are really influential in the ecosystem. I would call them a keystone species. They're one of those species that can just really have a big impact. And so it is a good idea, I think, to understand what's going on in terms of squid populations and changes over time and how they fit into the ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. Talking of squid hunting and eating, how do they hunt? Do they hunt as a group? Because I've seen, and a lot of people kind of see schools of squid, and they form these weird patterns where they'll line up in a bit of a line away from you, almost like a train track. What are they doing?
Okay, that's actually spawning behaviour. They do sometimes hunt in little groups, but I think what you're seeing, would that have been southern calamari?
Yeah, southern calamari, and often around diving lights.
And the edges of seagrass beds, perhaps?
Yeah, just in the shallows, I guess.
Yeah, so most southern calamari are spawning on inshore areas, 20 metres or less. They will spawn on a whole lot of different habitats, but they do particularly like seagrass. And you'll get spawning all throughout the year that might just be your individual squid going off doing their own thing. But you do get particular times of the year, spring in particular, Great Oyster Bay, where they'll aggregate in larger groups. And what happens is that you might get a bigger group. They'll be hanging up all around together in the water column, and then males and females will go down to the very bottom of the seagrass in pairs. So the male will guard the female while she's depositing a string of eggs. Then that pair will move away, and then another pair will come down, and the male will protect the new female there, the new male and the new female, and that female will add a strand to the same batch of eggs. So when you see a batch of eggs from a group spawning, it could have 10 different individual females' eggs in it. They'll do that for at least 30 minutes, and then after a period of time, they will separate into single-sex schools and hang off in lines on the edge of the seagrass. I don't know what they're doing. They might just be having a bit of a debrief, a bit of a chat about what's been going down on the seagrass bed. But they take some time out, have a bit of a rest and recharge, and then they'll get going again and have another bout of mass spawning together.
Wow, with the same groups, or they will go off and find another group?
Well, we're not sure what happens in the world of swinging and squids, but we know that female squid will have multiple partners, but by looking at the composition of the sperm, but we don't know how long those pairs of formed, like in terms of the partnerships between the male and the female squid. We don't know if are they just hanging out for the day? Is it a week? But let's talk about squid spawning for a while, actually, because one of the very funky things about squid is how they spawn. Or how they mate. And so you've got males that have got one of those 8 arms that we were talking about before. On the end of one of those arms is basically a modified spoon called a hectocotylus, right? And what the male does is he'll reach inside the opening of his mantle, grab a sperm packet with his hectocotylus, and he'll rock up to a female squid. So this is all in southern calamari. It's a bit different in other, each species has got their little tweaks of how they go about things. But male southern calamari will go up to the female southern calamari and he'll whack that sperm packet into a pouch in her mouth called the buccal cavity, sticks the sperm packet in there, and then that female squid can fertilise her eggs if and when she likes. So she can just reach into that buccal cavity, grab the sperm packet that she would like to use at that time, and fertilises the eggs on the way out. So that's how the actual mating and fertilisation works. But there are at least three different types of mating that happens. One is that paired spawning that we were talking about, where there's a male and he's guarding a female. You then there's a group of males that are smaller that we call sneaky squids. And these sneaky squids, they're small. They will put on the colour displays of a female squid and they will go right up to a spawning pair. And this male that looks like a female will slip a little sperm packet into the paired female, and the male just completely ignores it because he thinks it's another female squid just swinging by to say hello or, I don't know, give her a bit of encouragement or something. Doesn't know that it's actually a male squid that has slipped a sperm packet in there. So you get the sneaky males, the paired males, and then you get big males called bull males, and they will literally just swim around and steal females and take them away from the paired ones, mate with, and then bugger off.
Wow, and that's all within the one species?
Yep. All of them at the same time on the one spawning ground. Yep, you can see the little sneaky ones, you can see the paired ones that seem to be a bit slow, not catching up to what's happening with the sneaky ones around, and then the big males that will just go around and, steal females. And the colour displays that the animals make while they're doing the spawning actually gives you a little bit of a clue as to what's happening. So after, one of the colour displays that a male can do after the sperm packet has been successfully transferred, a researcher that was studying the behaviour in the colour displays calls this particular colour pattern the postman, because he said that he knows that the package has been successfully delivered if he sees this particular colour display on male squid. Yeah, so they're pretty interesting critters.
Yeah, and are they using that colour change to signal to the other squid around?
I don't know what maybe they're bragging. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know what they're doing, but they definitely do a particular colour display when they've passed the sperm packet over.
Wow! And do they do colour displays at other times of their life?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, in southern calamari, I think there's at least 56 different colour displays from memory that a researcher called Troy Jansen that was working down here for a little while. 56 different displays that he interpreted as meaning very particular things. And there's one display, for example, that if a male squid wants to defend his female and there's another interested male hanging around that he recognises as male, he will put a big there'll be these angry colour blotches that go over his body. Some bits will be white and some bits will be dark, and it does actually looks angry. But if a male squid wants to attract a female, then his hey how about it kind of signal is this I find it quite mesmerising, and I'm not a squid, but it's this moving sort of patch of colour that kind of sort of goes down the body in this rhythmic kind of way. So you get this sort of bold colour that just kind of glides down the body, and then then you get this clear pattern, then it's dark again. But it looks quite mesmerising. And I've even seen in a tank, when we had some animals in a tank, where there was a female on one side, the defending male in the middle, and then on the other side of the male was another squid that was trying to muscle in on his lady squid. And this male squid that's trying to defend, on one, you could draw a line, down his body, where one side of his body was flashing the hey, hey, how about it signal to the female squid, and the other side was doing the dark, angry blotches to the male going, go away, this one's mine.
Wow.
So they can have two conversations at once. How cool is that?
And I love that because that's what they're doing. They're having a conversation.
Yeah.
So speaking of things you've seen in tanks or things you've seen in the wild, what's been one of your best squid encounters or one of the craziest things you've seen of squid, either in the lab or in the wild?
I reckon it would actually be that thing with the two conversations at once. But there is a crazy thing I've seen on video, but that's not mine. And that was, we were talking about feeding and them being voracious feeders and stuff before. And there's a squid species in the US called Dosidicus gigas, Humboldt squid, big squid. So they can be like 6 foot long. And I used to have a video that I'd show in teaching about squid where, you get this Humboldt squid caught a 6 foot mackerel. They bite it in the back of the neck. So they take the spinal column out of the fish to stop it struggling, and then they turn it around to the tail, and it's like it's going into a chip mill or a blender or something like that. You just see this, the arms manoeuvring around the mackerel, and they're literally just ramming it in like a wood chipper or something, and it eats it in less than 10 seconds. This 6 foot mackerel thing, it was just the most bizarre thing to see.
So it's like a 6 foot squid eating a 6 foot fish.
Yeah.
Wow, almost like a snake.
Yep. But the scary thing is though that they actually have the mental capacity or whatever to go, I'm going to take out its spinal column so that it stops struggling. I just find that fascinating. They're very intelligent things.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. So do you have any other, we've spoken about quite a few things, but do you have any other random cool facts about squid that we haven't mentioned? Just really stand out.
Well, there's things like they have 3 hearts, they have blue blood. They extract oxygen through their skin. Actually, we haven't talked about chromatophores. Let's talk about the squid skin first, right? So squid all over their body have these little sacs of ink or sacs of a dark pigment at the very surface of their skin. And each one of these little sacs or chromatophores is again under independent nerve control. So they can squeeze this little sac really tight and all the skin around it will go clear. Or they can expand the sac and it'll go dark. And they have different coloured pigments all over their skin, so they can, shrink all the black ones and increase the brown ones, or shrink the brown ones and increase the black ones, and that's how they actually create all these patterns all over their body. So when they're, say, being chased by a predator, what they can do is they can shrink all of those chromatophores all over their body all at the same time and go white or almost completely clear. And then they'll shoot out some ink at the same time. And so the predator or the fish, whatever it is that's chasing them, could be a shark or a dolphin or something, will see the squid. The squid might, before it does this, it might go completely dark all over with its chromatophores, making them all expand. And then it'll shrink all the chromatophores, shoot this giant ball of ink out. And the idea is that the fish that's trying to eat them sees dark animal, and then all of a sudden there's a dark ball of ink there, but the animal's gone. So they'll use that ink as a defense to create a diversion. They're essentially just creating a diversion and running away. And then other ways they can use the ink is when they're actually doing the preying and they're trying to chase something, and sometimes they can shoot out a bit of ink which has got a substance in it which can be irritating and blocking to the gills of something else that they're trying to catch and eat. So there's different things that they can do with the ink, and they can change the consistency and the thickness of the ink. So if they want to, create a smoke screen, they can shoot the ink out, in a really sort of way that just goes everywhere. But if they want to make it look like their particular body, then they'll put a whole lot of, what's the word?
Mucus.
Mucus, that's the word. Yeah, they'll make it this tight sort of mucus ball. So they can do different things with the ink and change the consistency, and I don't think it ever runs out.
Wow. And This just amazes me because we talked about how they like bite the fish in the back of the neck, and then they're changing the consistency of their ink depending on what they want to do, and they're hunting with it. They're pretty smart for such a short-lived creature.
They are. We could refer to them as the pinnacle of invertebrate evolution. So, they don't have a backbone, but they've got a very big brain. And, yeah, it's quite fascinating. And their brain is very large for their body size as well. And I think they have some of the largest eyes per body size in the animal world. And that's actually why their brains are so... or their eyes and their brains are big because they're constantly looking around and, harvesting a whole lot of information about the world and processing that and doing, making decisions with it about, where they're moving, how they're mating. Are they going to be a trickster and, put on the displays of the opposite gender to trick their mate and have a go? Yeah, all sorts of things.
Yeah, and I mean, does this mean that the really big squid have really big brains?
They do have very big brains. It's probably in proportion compared to the other squid. But yeah, giant squid do some pretty diabolical things.
Yeah, like what's one of them?
Ooh, well, mating in giant squid. So we were talking in southern calamari how the female had that pouch on the inside of her mouth. Well, giant squid, I imagine if you're a giant squid and you're living, a couple of thousand metres under the ocean, you might not run into other giant squid that often, and you might think that they're even a predator or a competitor or something. So maybe you don't want to get too close too quickly for too long. But the way that they mate is that the modified arm on a male giant squid is literally like a staple gun. He doesn't have a spoon, he's got a staple gun. And so that male will go up to a female squid and use the staple gun anywhere on the giant squid female's body. If he can get close enough, he'll staple some sperms in. Could be on her head, on her arms, body, anywhere. And that female giant squid has got a modified hook on the end of one of her arms, and she will rip open the skin with wherever the males put the sperm and then fertilise the eggs herself that way. So it's like both of them are modified for not encountering the opposite gender that often. Yeah, the males can just whack sperm in anywhere, and then the female can go off on her own and months later use that modified hook to reopen the skin there and extract the sperm from underneath and fertilise the eggs on her own.
Wow, so she could probably have a few different packets and just can be selective, and that's insane.
And actually genetic studies, not of giant squid because, they're a bit hard to sample and stuff, but other squid species and other octopus species shows that the female is choosing which sperm to use not based on the volume or the abundance of that sperm. So she can be using other criteria, I don't know what they are, but other criteria and selecting a particular male's sperm. Yeah.
Wow.
So it's not random. She's not choosing random. She's not just randomly kind of using whatever she comes across.
Wow. That's another PhD for someone to do, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, just before we wrap up, if people, hope everyone's really interested in squid after listening to this, but if you're a snorkeler or a diver and you want to encounter squid in Australia or anywhere in the world, what kind of places would you look at and where would you go, or what kind of time of day? What would you do?
Well, there's probably a squid species or an octopus species for pretty much any habitat and any time of day. But because of all those things that we were talking about earlier about their behaviour and their camouflage, they can be there, but you won't see them unless you really got your eye in. Tasmania, for example, you could see southern calamari around the inshore seagrass beds. There's, other little squids that are buried under the sand there, and you'll see their little eyes poking out at night if you're diving with those. The bobtail squids and things, which are so very cute. And then you can have those little Idiosepius ones with the sucker glands on their backs that can sometimes be adhering to kelp and seagrass and things like that you wouldn't notice. Yeah, but you can go to pretty much any kind of habitat. Yeah, you just got to get your eye in.
Awesome, cool. Well, thanks very much for being on the show. If anyone wants to learn more or see some of your stuff about squid or anything like that, where should they go and what should they do?
Ooh, well, on the REDMAP website, so the Range Extension Database and Mapping website that citizen science project that I run. There's a couple of articles on there about squid that talks about their spawning and their camouflage and things like that. And then there is a TV episode for homeschooled kids that the University of Tasmania recorded about a year or so ago called Squids and Other Suckers. And so if you Googled Squids and Other Suckers and Greta, you'd come across a TV little recorded episode thing that talks about all the cool things about squids.
Awesome, cool. I'll post links to both of those in the podcast notes. But it's been awesome. Thanks for being on.
Oh, thank you. I always love talking about squid, so thanks for the opportunity.
Seacreatures Podcast is hosted, edited and produced by myself, Matt Testoni. If you like the show, jump onto our Instagram where you can see lots of updates. That's Seacreatures_podcast. And you can check out some of my photography at Matt_Testoni_photography on Instagram as well. If you'd like to support the show, consider giving a one-off donation at buymeacoffee.com/Matt Testoni just to help us with our monthly running costs. If you really like the show, we also have Patreon, where you can sign up to be an official Sea Creature for $3 a month, and that just helps us with all our running costs. And a big thank you to all our current Patreons, Jared, Derek, Imogen, Bridge, Sally, Jeremy, Kelly, and Warren. Your support means so much. Assistant production by George McGrath, and music by the awesome Dan Musil. Coming up next time on the Sea Creatures Podcast, we're going to be chatting all about lionfish with a repeat guest, one of our favorites, Klaus. Until next time, this has been the Sea Creatures Podcast. Over and out.